The clink of metal against porcelain sliced through the warmth of the room. Everyone paused. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze in the air. Even the laughter that had filled my parents' small dining room just seconds earlier seemed to evaporate. Anaya slowly placed her spoon down, pressing her lips together as if she were trying to swallow something far heavier than food. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, eyes darting around the table before finally landing, just for a second, on my husband. If this story touched your heart, friends, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more touching stories. Thank you for being here. That glance told me everything. Fear, expectation, a silent warning. She inhaled deeply, the kind of breath someone takes before jumping off a cliff. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "Mom, Dad, everyone, I need to tell you something." Silence wrapped around us, like a tightening rope. Anaya lowered her head, fingers clutching the edge of the table, and whispered the words that would fracture every relationship in that room. "I'm pregnant." The air exploded. My brother, Tavon, sat frozen for 2 heartbeats, as if his brain couldn't process the sentence fast enough. Then joy burst out of him like a firework. He jumped up, nearly knocking his chair over, laughing and shouting all at once. "I'm going to be a father! Did you hear that? Dad! Mom! I'm going to be a dad!" My parents were radiant. My mother clasped her hands together, tears spilling freely, as she murmured thanks to heaven and every ancestor she could remember. She rushed to the kitchen and returned with a steaming bowl of stew, placing it lovingly in front of Anaya. "Eat, dear, eat well. My grandson needs strength. No wonder you've been looking so tired." The table filled with congratulations, blessings, and future plans. But beneath the celebration, 3 people were unraveling. Anaya forced a smile that never reached her eyes. One hand rested on her stomach, not protectively but desperately, like someone gripping the edge of a sinking boat. My husband's reaction was worse. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost frightening. His fork slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly to the floor. Tavon laughed, completely oblivious. "Careful, brother-in-law. So happy your hands are shaking." My husband bent down to retrieve the fork, his smile stiff and unnatural. He nodded too quickly, drank an entire glass of water in one gulp, and avoided everyone's eyes. Sweat beaded at his temples. I watched him closely. He wasn't shocked. He was terrified. That pregnancy wasn't part of his plan. It wasn't supposed to exist. I could see the panic behind his eyes, the realization that something dangerous had just entered the game, a variable he couldn't control. And me? I sat perfectly still, observing it all with a calm that even surprised myself. I lifted my glass and spoke gently, my tone warm enough to pass unnoticed. "Congratulations. A child is a blessing. Make sure you go to all your medical checkups and confirm everything clearly. How far along you are, all the details. Health is important." Anaya stiffened. Her face went pale. She avoided my gaze and hurriedly bent over her soup, pretending to sip, while her hands shook. I smiled to myself. The meal continued with laughter and dreams of the future, but under the table, knees trembled and secrets screamed. By the time we left my parents' house, the storm had already begun, quiet and invisible and unstoppable. And as my husband drove us home in silence, his knuckles white around the steering wheel, I knew one thing for certain. That baby wasn't the beginning of a new life. It was the beginning of the end. But what none of them knew was this: by the time that child was born, the truth would already have destroyed every lie holding this family together.
The moment we left my parents' house, the celebration stayed behind like a discarded costume. Inside the car, Silence took over, not the comfortable kind, the kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels loud. The hum of the engine and the hiss of tires against wet asphalt were the only sounds filling the luxury vehicle my husband was so proud of. Streetlights passed in slow, rhythmic flashes, briefly illuminating his face before plunging it back into shadow. He didn't say a word. His hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned bone white. I watched the tension crawl up his arms, settle in his shoulders, and lock his jaw. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing, as if words were trapped there, choking him. I leaned back in my seat and waited. Silence has a way of forcing the truth to surface. After several minutes, he finally spoke, his voice stiff, forced casual. "You didn't have to say all that back there." I turned my head slowly. "Say what?" "About the checkups, the weeks. You made it sound strange." I studied his profile, the tight mouth, the darting eyes, the fear he couldn't quite hide. "I was being caring," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what family does?" He exhaled sharply through his nose. "Of course, I just think sometimes you overthink things." I almost smiled. Overthink. If only he knew how much thinking I had already done. When we arrived home, he didn't even wait for me to take off my shoes. He went straight to the bathroom, turning on the shower at full force. Water thundered against the tiles, as if he were trying to drown his own thoughts. I stood in the hallway, listening. That night, he barely touched his dinner, pushed the food around his plate, claimed he had a headache, then poured himself a drink, and another. By the third glass, his words slurred slightly, but his eyes were still sharp with unease. When he finally collapsed into bed, alcohol heavy and restless, I lay beside him facing the wall, wide awake. At around 1:30 a.m., his phone vibrated. Once, twice. He stirred, fumbling for it, careful not to wake me, or at least he thought I was asleep. He slipped out of bed and locked himself in the bathroom, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. "I told you to calm down. You're panicking for nothing." A pause, then frustration. "No, you listen to me. Don't message me like that again. Do you understand?" Another pause. I could hear muffled sobbing on the other end. "She doesn't know anything. Stop imagining things." Liar. When he returned to bed, he smelled of soap and fear. His body trembled slightly as he lay down, phone clutched tight against his chest. I closed my eyes and breathed evenly, pretending sleep. Inside, something cold and steady was forming. The next morning, I woke early and made breakfast as usual. Toast, coffee, normalcy. He barely looked at me, mumbling something about work before rushing out the door. The moment it closed behind him, my expression changed. I picked up my phone and opened a message thread I hadn't used in months. "I need everything," I typed. "No shortcuts, no assumptions. I want facts." The reply came almost instantly. "Understood. I'll start today." I set the phone down and stared out the window. They thought the danger was the baby. They were wrong. The real danger was me, quiet, patient, and finally done believing lies. And while they scrambled to protect their secret, they had no idea I had just opened the door to the truth that would bury them both. By the third day, my brother Tavon could no longer pretend everything was fine. He called me late in the afternoon, his voice unusually quiet. No jokes, no enthusiasm, just exhaustion. "Can you come get me?" he asked. "I don't want to be home right now." I didn't ask questions. Some truths need the right moment and the right place to be revealed. I drove him to Makara's apartment, a quiet high-rise tucked away from curious eyes. Makara had always been discreet. She prepared a pot of tea, showed us to the living room, and left without asking a single question. The door closed softly behind her, sealing us in silence. Tavon sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it held answers it refused to give. His shoulders were slumped,
his hands clenched and unclenched over and over again. I took out my phone. "Tavon," I said gently, "before I show you anything, you need to understand one thing." He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Just tell me." "This is going to hurt," I continued, "and once you see it, there's no going back." He swallowed hard and nodded. I pressed play. The video lasted barely 2 minutes. 2 minutes that destroyed 10 years of trust. At first, confusion flickered across his face, then disbelief. His brows knitted together as he leaned closer to the screen, as if hoping he was mistaken. Then recognition hit. His lips parted, his breathing grew shallow, and when the sounds became unmistakable, his wife's voice, his brother-in-law's body, something inside him cracked. "Turn it off," he whispered. I didn't. By the time the video ended, Tavon was on his feet, bolting toward the bathroom. The sound of retching echoed through the apartment, raw and violent. He vomited until there was nothing left. Trust, love, pride, all expelled in painful heaves. I stood in the doorway, my chest tight, but my hands steady. When he finally emerged, his face was pale, hollow, but his eyes had changed. The warmth was gone. In its place burned something cold and unshakable. "I was a fool," he said hoarsely. "I worked myself into the ground for her. Everything I did was for her." I took his hand. "This isn't your failure. It's theirs." He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "I want a divorce." No hesitation, no doubt. "If the child is mine," he continued, voice flat, "I'll take responsibility, but if it isn't, they're both out. No mercy." I nodded slowly. "I'll help you with everything." That night, we didn't talk much. Pain hung in the air like thick smoke, but beneath it, resolve began to take shape. The next morning, while Tavon slept on the couch, I sat across from Makara at the dining table. A sealed folder lay between us, thick, heavy, final. "Everything's inside," she said quietly. "Photos, messages, financial trails, timelines." I opened it just enough to see the edges of printed proof. "Is the report ready?" I asked. She nodded. "Addressed to the company's board, internal audit, and compliance committee. Once it's sent, there's no stopping it." I didn't hesitate. "Send it." Makara clicked her laptop. That single sound was the trigger. Less than 2 hours later, my husband was summoned to an emergency meeting. No explanation, no warning, just an urgent call from the CEO's office. When he walked out of the building that afternoon, his face told the story before his mouth ever could. The downfall had begun. But what happened inside that boardroom would make betrayal look merciful by comparison. The first cracks didn't come from confrontation. They came from whispers. A few days after the family gathering, the atmosphere inside our home shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. My husband started coming home later than usual, his footsteps sharper, his temper shorter. One evening, he burst through the door and threw his briefcase onto the couch with enough force to make me flinch. The smell of alcohol hit me instantly. I closed my book and stood up, putting on my most concerned expression. "Have you been drinking? It's still a weekday. Did something happen at work?" He shrugged off his jacket aggressively. "People talk too much," he snapped. "A bunch of bored idiots with nothing better to do than destroy reputations." I poured him a glass of water with lemon and sat beside him, rubbing his back slowly, carefully. "Who's talking about you?" I asked softly. "If you've done nothing wrong, there's nothing to fear." He turned to me, eyes bloodshot, studying my face as if searching for cracks in my innocence. Finding none, he looked away and sighed. "They're saying I'm having an affair. Ridiculous. Jealousy, that's all. They know I'm about to be promoted." Inside, I smiled. Outwardly, I gasped. "An affair? That's horrible. How can people be so cruel?" Then I added gently, almost thoughtfully, "But, the more someone defends themselves, the more others think it's true. Best to ignore it." The effect was immediate. His body stiffened, his jaw clenched. That sentence hit something deep, some unhealed nerve. He nodded quickly, too quickly. Exactly, I'm innocent, I have nothing to fear. But his hands betrayed him. They trembled. That night, he didn't eat. He locked himself in the bathroom and let the shower run endlessly, as if trying to scrub the rumors off his skin. I sat on the couch listening to the water pound against the tiles, feeling an unfamiliar calm. Did he think about my dignity when he betrayed me? About Tibbons? About the family he shattered? When he finally stumbled into bed, drunk and exhausted, his phone lit up on the nightstand. I glanced at it. I'm scared. People are looking at me differently. What if we end this? The message was from Anaya. I didn't delete it. I left it there, face up, waiting for him to see it in the morning, to understand that his secret wasn't safe and his accomplice was starting to crumble. Over the next few days, Anaya unraveled fast. Late-night social media posts about loneliness and fear appeared, then vanished minutes later. She stopped replying in the family group chat. Meanwhile, my husband started sneaking into the bathroom at odd hours, whispering urgently into his phone. I told you not to panic. You're making things worse. Her sobs leaked through the speaker. She wanted reassurance, protection, a promise, and he had none to give. I watched it all quietly, like a chess player waiting for the right move. The rumors were doing exactly what I hoped, tightening the pressure, exposing weaknesses. They didn't destroy him outright, but they took his peace, his sleep, his appetite. And fear makes people reckless. I knew Anaya was the weakest link. Guilt weighed heavier on her than ambition ever had. She wanted safety, and she wanted it fast. That desperation would force a mistake. I turned off the bedroom light that night, smiling into the darkness. Because when lies begin to suffocate, the truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs to wait. And Anaya was about to do something so desperate it would expose everything they had fought to hide. While fear gnawed at his conscience, my husband still believed he had one shield left: money. He had always been like that, arrogant in his confidence, convinced that finances were his territory, that numbers could protect him from consequences. He mistook my silence for ignorance, my calm for exhaustion. He had no idea I was already counting everything he had stolen. With proof of his betrayal secured, I moved to the next phase of my plan. Affairs destroy trust, but money exposes character, and I knew him well enough to understand one thing. If cornered emotionally, he would lie. If cornered financially, he would panic. So I created the trap carefully. One weekend evening, I cooked an elaborate dinner: candlelight, wine, soft music. I laughed at his jokes, asked about his work, played the role he expected, the forgiving, distracted wife. By the time he finished his second glass of wine, his guard was down. That's when I spoke. Today, I saw a piece of land on the outskirts, I said casually. It's perfect. The owner needs cash urgently, so the price is unbelievably low. I was thinking we could use part of our savings as a deposit. The effect was instant. His smile vanished. The wine glass froze midair. His eyes sharpened, alcohol burned away by fear. Land? He repeated. Now? The market's terrible. Why would you rush into something like that? I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Because it's an opportunity. Money sitting in the bank barely grows. Real assets are safer. He swallowed, hard. And how much are you thinking of taking out? I asked. About 100,000, I replied lightly. His face drained of color, sweat formed at his hairline. He set the glass down as if it suddenly weighed too much. That's not possible right now. I leaned forward slightly. Why not? He hesitated, eyes darting, mind scrambling for an excuse. Finally, he sighed heavily, like a man burdened by misfortune. He invested it. Stocks. The market crashed. If I pull out now, we'll lose almost half. I need time. The classic lie. I already knew the truth. The savings hadn't gone to the stock market. They had gone to secret transfers, luxury gifts, and payments on a small apartment registered under his mother's name. But I let disappointment soften my features. "Oh," I said quietly, "I wish you'd told me earlier." He nodded eagerly, relieved. "I didn't want to worry you." That night, he barely slept. He turned over and over again, fingers twitching, phone lighting up and going dark as he typed and erased messages. Fear had fully settled in. The next morning, I left early with the excuse of a meeting. In reality, I met the private investigator Makara had recommended. The cafe was hidden in a narrow street, quiet and discreet. The investigator slid a thick brown envelope across the table toward me, his expression solemn. "Take your time," he said. My hands trembled as I opened it. Photos spilled out. Lunch dates, hidden corners of cafes, hands intertwined across tables, smiles meant only for lovers, not rushed encounters, but intimacy practiced over time. They hadn't even bothered to hide. The pain hit hard, but it was sharp, focused, and strangely clarifying. There was no room left for doubt. I gathered the photos carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. He had gambled everything: love, trust, money, and lust, and I was done pretending otherwise. But what I discovered next proved his betrayal wasn't just personal, it was criminal. Once fear took hold, my husband began unraveling faster than I expected. He grew jumpy, startled by sudden sounds, irritated by harmless questions, defensive over nothing. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I decided to press where it hurt most. "Do you remember that article I read?" I asked gently, stirring my soup. "About people under extreme stress doing things at night without remembering them?" He stiffened. "They call it unconscious behavior," I continued. "Sleepwalking, driving without awareness. It's dangerous. Maybe we should see a doctor." He pushed his chair back abruptly. "That's unnecessary." I looked at him with concern. "I'm worried about you. What if something happened while you were driving? What would happen to me?" My words were coded in care, but underneath they tightened around his throat like wire. He began pacing. "I'm just stressed, that's all. Work, rumors, I'll manage it myself." I nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, just be careful. I heard that waking a sleepwalker suddenly can cause shock." Then I added, almost absentmindedly, "Oh, and the doorman mentioned seeing your car near Anaya's building late one night. You were probably checking on her, right? She's pregnant. That's very kind of you." He froze. His face turned ashen. He spun around to face me, eyes wide with panic. "That's not true. You're imagining things." "I must be," I replied calmly. It just got my attention. He fled to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. That night, he didn't sleep. He tossed and turned, phone glowing briefly in the darkness as he typed messages he never sent. I lay with my back to him, breathing evenly, listening to every restless movement. He was warning her, planning, scrambling. The next morning, I met Makara again. This time, she didn't waste words. "It's worse than we thought," she said, opening a thick file. "The affair is just the surface." I scanned the pages. Contracts, transfers, invoices, patterns emerged fast. He's been abusing his position, inflating supplier contracts, taking commissions, routing the money through shell accounts. My stomach tightened. "This transfer," she pointed, "went to his mother's account, labeled as a loan repayment. It's a kickback." "How much?" I asked quietly. "Close to $1 million over 2 years." I closed my eyes. So that was it. Not just betrayal, corruption. "The company will prosecute," she said. "This isn't something that can be smoothed over." I nodded. "Prepare everything." That evening, I delivered the final psychological blow. While he smoked on the balcony, I handed him a glass of juice. "I visited Anaya today," I said softly. "She was crying. She said someone is pressuring her, hinting about abortion. She's scared."
The cigarette slipped from his fingers. "What?" he whispered. "Who would do that?" "I don't know," I shrugged. It worried me. His breathing grew erratic. Suspicion replaced fear. Later that night, I sent Anaya an anonymous message. "He's looking for lawyers, planning to protect himself. You and the baby are liabilities." Their alliance cracked completely. Lovers became enemies. And I only needed to wait. Because when fear turns partners against each other, the truth comes out on its own.
The collapse didn't happen in public. It happened at home. One quiet evening just after sunset, my husband came back earlier than usual. No angry footsteps, no slamming doors, just silence, and that was far more dangerous. He placed his keys neatly on the table, removed his jacket, and sat down across from me. I looked up from my laptop. "You didn't go to work?" I asked calmly. "They asked me to take a few days off," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "Administrative review." I nodded slowly. "That sounds serious." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I need to know something." I met his gaze. "What?" "Do you know anything?" he asked. "About the rumors, about the investigation, about her." There it was, the question he had been circling for weeks. I closed my laptop and folded my hands. "I know you've been acting strangely. I know money is missing. I know Anaya is pregnant and terrified. And I know Tavon hasn't spoken to her in days." His breathing hitched. "I also know," I continued softly, "that secrets don't stay buried forever." He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a trapped animal. "You're twisting things. You're making connections that aren't real." "Then explain them," I said gently. He stopped. His shoulders slumped. The mask cracked. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he whispered. "It started small, just talking. I was lonely. You were always busy. Then one mistake turned into many." I stayed silent. "And the money," he added quickly. "I was going to put it back, I swear. Once I got promoted, everything would have been fine." Lies layered over lies. "You risked prison," I said quietly, "and you risked Tavon's life." That word hit him harder than anything else. He dropped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "She said the baby is mine," he muttered. "If that's true, everything is over." I stood and walked toward the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. Everything was over the moment you chose yourself over everyone else. He looked up sharply. "What are you going to do?" I turned back to him, my expression unreadable. "What would you do if you were me?" His eyes filled with fear, real fear, the kind that strips a person bare. "Please," he said, "don't destroy me. I'll fix this. I'll confess to Tavon. I'll leave the company. I'll disappear if you want." I almost laughed. Instead, I smiled sadly. Confessions don't erase damage, and disappearing doesn't protect the innocent. The room fell silent again. That night, he slept on the couch. I locked the bedroom door for the first time in our marriage. At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Anaya. "I can't do this anymore. I'm going to tell Tavon everything." I typed a single response. "Good." I turned off my phone and lay back, heart pounding, not with fear, but anticipation. Because once the truth was spoken out loud, there would be no turning back. And when dawn came, the fallout would be brutal enough to shatter what little remained of their lives. Morning arrived without mercy. No dramatic music, no warnings, just sunlight cutting through the curtains, illuminating the wreckage waiting to happen. I made coffee as usual, the smell rich and grounding, even as my phone buzzed nonstop on the counter. I didn't check it. I already knew what was happening. By 9 a.m., Tavon was at my door. He didn't knock. He stood there silently until I opened it, his face drawn, eyes swollen and red like he hadn't slept at all. Anaya stood behind him, arms wrapped around herself, her body shaking. Her eyes were empty. No more fear, no more strategy, just surrender. She told me, Tavon said hoarsely. I stepped aside and let them in. Anaya collapsed onto the couch, sobbing so violently it looked painful. Tavon remained standing, fists clenched, breathing uneven. She told me everything, he repeated. The affair, the lies, the money, the baby. My husband emerged from the bedroom then, hair disheveled, eyes darting nervously between us. The moment he saw Tavon, his knees nearly buckled. Tavon, listen, he began. Don't, Tavon snapped. That single word carried years of brotherhood and its death. Anaya lifted her head, tears streaking her face. I didn't plan it, she cried. It just happened. I was weak. I was scared. And now I'm pregnant and alone. Tavon laughed, a short, broken sound. You were never alone. You had me. The room vibrated with grief and rage. Tavon turned to my husband. Is the baby yours? Silence. My husband opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. That was it. The last thread snapped. Tavon stepped back, as if physically struck. His hands trembled. Then, without another word, he pulled a folded envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. Divorce papers, he said. If the child isn't mine, you'll never see me again. Anaya let out a wail and slid to the floor. I watched everything unfold without intervening, because this wasn't my moment to speak. The real explosion came an hour later. My husband's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went pale. They terminated me, he whispered, effective immediately. Then another notification. His bank account frozen. Then another call. His lawyer. The corruption report had gone public. Regulatory bodies, financial crimes, criminal charges pending. He sank into a chair, staring into nothing. Tavon looked at him with something close to pity. You destroyed 2 families, he said quietly. And for what? There was no answer. By noon, Anaya had left, escorted by Tavon, her future uncertain and fragile. By evening, my husband was still sitting there, unmoving, surrounded by the ruins of his choices. I finally spoke. I want you out by tomorrow. He looked up at me, eyes hollow. I have nowhere to go. I shrugged. That was your decision. As he packed in silence, the house felt lighter, emptier, but free. Because some endings aren't sad. They're necessary. But the final reckoning, the one that would decide who walked away whole, was still waiting. The house was quiet the morning he left. Not the tense, suffocating quiet we had lived in for weeks, but a clean one, the kind that feels like fresh air after a long illness. I stood in the doorway and watched as my husband zipped the last of his bags, his movements slow, uncertain, like a man who would finally run out of places to hide. He didn't ask me to stop him. He didn't apologize either. Some people don't beg when they know they've lost everything. At the door, he hesitated. If the investigation clears, if I fix things, can we talk? I met his eyes without anger. We're already done talking. He nodded, accepting it at last, and walked out of my life. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing deeply. Not relief, not joy, clarity. Later that day, Tavon called. The DNA results were in. The child wasn't his. He didn't cry when he told me. His voice was steady, resigned. But beneath it, I heard something stronger. Freedom. I'm moving on, he said. It'll take time, but I will. You will, I replied, and you won't carry her shame with you. That evening, I sat alone on the balcony, city lights stretching endlessly below. For the first time in months, my phone was silent. No threats, no apologies, no secrets demanding attention. Just peace. Weeks passed. The legal process moved forward quickly. Assets were divided, accounts were audited, truth replaced illusion on paper after paper. My husband's name appeared in headlines I didn't read twice. Anaya vanished from family gatherings, her future uncertain, her choices irreversible. And me? I reclaimed myself. I traveled. I slept deeply. I laughed without checking my phone. I stopped measuring my worth against loyalty I never received. I learned something powerful in the aftermath of betrayal. Closure doesn't come from revenge. It comes from self-respect. One afternoon, as I packed away old photographs, I found a picture from years ago, us smiling, arms around each other, believing in a future that never truly existed. I stared at it for a moment, then placed it gently in a box and sealed it shut. Some memories don't deserve space in the present. I didn't become bitter. I became wiser. I didn't lose a marriage. I escaped a lie. And as I stepped forward into a life built on truth instead of illusion, I understood something clearly. Walking away was never weakness. It was survival. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's living so well that the past no longer has power over you. If today's story touched your heart or kept you hooked, you can show your love by sending a super thanks. Your support helps me continue creating more powerful life stories for you. Thank you truly for always being so kind and supportive. I can't wait to read your thoughts about this story. On your screen right now, you'll find 2 new stories that I highly recommend, filled with emotions, twists, and lessons. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for many more inspiring life stories. Until the next one, sending you love, respect, and gratitude. See you in the next story.